Hey, this is Boaz. Thanks for showing up. Please visit the Fools and Sages podcast at foolsandsagespodcast.com. There are no spaces and it's all spelled out. You can find show notes, references, bios, merch, and other cool features. Contact us if you have feedback or a question, if you want to appear on the show, or if you want either or both of us to be a guest on your podcast. You can listen and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Podcasts, and anywhere else great podcasts are found. And follow us on X and Instagram. Support us on Patreon. The Patreon link's also in our website. And thank you. Enjoy the show. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning. How are you doing, sir?
I'm well, thanks. It's been unseasonably warm in Philly the last week or two, and now it's finally getting cold again. So now I feel like it's winter in the Northeast. So
Yeah, that's a different story.
yeah,
It's a
like
little, it's sunny outside. You can see coming in, but I've also got the fire on. So we're kind of in that in between place, but
yeah,
it could be worse. So I'm not complaining.
yeah, cool. So I know you don't spend much time on X, nay Twitter, um,
Right.
but there's been some interesting stuff going on there that has surfaced to mainstream media to some extent. So you might be aware that Vivek Ramaswamy posted something on X to the effect of, "We need the H-1B visas to bring talent into the United States." And something about, American culture being lacking in terms of creating the high level of drive that one might find in other cultures, which is part of his diagnosis for why we need to import talent.
Sounds like an excuse, but keep going.
Well, I think there is, something interesting to be said about what is unique about American culture, and maybe that's where we'll end up. But
Huh?
but there's more to the thread, which is the backlash on X revealed, I think, the side of MAGA that I've always been sort of suspicious was overblown. That is like the white supremacist. Um,
The
if you're
Democrat
not of
picture of MAGA.
European, the what?
The Democrat picture of MAGA.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it was bigger and louder than I expected. So like, there were a few situations where I would respond to somebody's comment on this topic, and someone would just come out of the woodworks and accuse me of being a Jew. And like, whoa,
Ah,
okay, I guess that's what we're playing with. It's good to know, right? Good to see, but it's really made me curious about like why race, because it seems like so fundamental, a part of how, let's say, the woke left operates in terms of its race essentialism. And now there's, this corner of MAGA has been branded the woke right by some also. Again, not just because of its race essentialism, but because of its um, discovery of a critical consciousness where they the people pulling the strings are everybody but white people, whereas the critical consciousness of the woke left is white people are pulling the strings, or white men in particular, right? So
ah.
it's kind of like the mirror image of the same critical consciousness. So woke left, woke right, and um, it just strikes me as sort of bizarre that we would settle on race as this great differentiator when
Yeah.
there it seems like there would be other options. So why this one? Like why? It's I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, and maybe we'll just see where we end up.
Yeah. My initial reaction is maybe this is just because of my schooling in the 36 strategies. Uh, but I have always interpreted race in the modern sense, the race issues. as very convenient for a certain class. Uh, my reading, and maybe this is from being doused in Kropotkin or something like that, but my reading is that you have an elite, a very small number by comparison to the world population, that would want to displace any anger, just or otherwise, which we know is there thanks to the Luigi phenomenon. They want to displace that on others. So rather than, I feel like a certain point in history, kings learned that if they marched around with a big gold hat, people that were having trouble feeding their kids would eventually, figure them out. So they've created levels of insulation a la Kafka to prevent any light actually shining on them. I remember somebody observing that the one of the curious similarities between the lowest classes and the highest classes is that they both try to keep their names out of the newspapers.
That sounds like something McLuhan would say. But go back to the Kafka reference you just made. I didn't understand the
Oh,
connection there.
when they come looking for you, you want to either say, "Hey, it's not you," or if you can displace anger that you really own onto your whole racial group, even though the reason you own that anger is because you did something sketchy to accrue all the benefit just to yourself. But you want that anger not focused on you. You want it focused on, it's like with the cartoon where the king is up on the castle with an advisor, and you got the people down on the ground with pitchforks and with torches, and
Sounds like
the
the Wizard of
advisors,
Id.
pardon?
Wizard of Id.
Well, it's something like that. And the advisor says to him, "You're my liege. All you have to do is get the pitchfork people mad at the torch people, and then they'll just take it out. They'll take each other out. And meanwhile, you just sit up here in the castle." And whenever I've seen modern, now when I grew up, I think there was really active racism. And I'm not saying that I don't think that there's racist people. I think that whenever, for whatever reason, our model of things slips below a certain resolution, we don't program individuals, and we start thinking in real big sloppy chunks. And if we have a lot of emotional energy, uh, this doesn't just happen with race. You see this directed against law enforcement or the government, right? Now, if you're somebody like myself that has, in my younger years, I taught people that went into law enforcement and some people from the military. And in my later years, I worked with people in government. And, the rule I found is that most people are well intentioned, and by their own standard, are trying to be good people. And then there's the influence of whatever the system or the context has on those people that sort of erodes them, sort of plugs into, do I run on ideology or do I run on principle? If I really run on principle, I'll pass the test. If I run on ideology, then I'll start rejecting evidence to keep the ideology intact instead of rejecting ideology to keep the evidence explained, right, validly. Individuals will be stupid. I think we all know that, with some individuals, it will be the rule. But so all that can be true. My personal experience is that when I see people, in private life, say something that's would be overtly racist, which I don't hear a lot. I don't ever see anybody going, "Yeah." I see people kind of looking at them like they're stupid. So, which they usually there's plenty of other evidence along with that that's made that an irrefutable case by that point, right? So I'm not sure that the problem isn't stupid people rather than particularly racism. But that doesn't mean that racism isn't convenient to ward off classism. Because if there is a class war, and when economic conditions are not fair, then there is de facto a class war. And when that's the case, then the people who inevitably the flashlight will start to swing around on, or the spotlight rather, which we've seen in recent events. Uh, and obviously that's not anything that they want. So it's a deflection. That's what I see it as. That's my initial boom, reading the strategic game on the world stage as I see it, that would be my immediate assumption is that it's a distraction. It's easier to rob a house when it's on fire. That's one of the 36 strategies.
Can you explain what you mean by um, when economic conditions are unfair, there's a de facto class war?
Sure. If I'm in a position that gives me influence over a system, and then I can tweak that system so that I have a better advantage to compete with everyone else than they have. Maybe I'm an insider trader. That seems to be vogue nowadays. Uh, well, now I can play the game, but I'm not playing the same game that everybody else is playing. I'm taking advantage of an unfair system that's going to generate an unfair result. If you have a system where once wealth accumulates beyond a certain point, that wealth starts to have its own isness, and it starts to become the elephant in the room, or the 300-pound gorilla is the old image. Where does the 300-pound gorilla sit? Anywhere he wants to. The golden rule. Who makes the rules? Whoever has the gold. Right? This is all old stuff. So this is not new. This is the stuff why there has been this controversy between left and right. Right? So, and when I say left and right, I mean old left and right, sitting on the left side of the king or the right side of the king. I don't mean what's passing now for left and right, because I don't recognize any of it, honestly. I think
So
it's all been
before we go
intentionally
to left and
scrambled.
right,
Yeah.
so I understand what's meant by economic unfairness and creating that situation. How is that a de facto class war? I guess
Oh,
you mean it's an economic war, or do you mean it's a like what do you mean by class war? I guess.
well, because all the people in a certain condition will experience the advantage, and all the other people in another condition will experience the disadvantage. They go to a bank for a loan. Some people get bank loans very easy. Some people don't get bank loans, and some of it is actually geographically determined, as I understand it. Uh, at the same time, if a certain person gets pulled over in a Benz, they're probably not going to get treated the same as if they're pulled over in a old VW with a muffler baling wired on. So you create a system where, and a lot. This is in game theory too, where once you start to win, it gets easier for you to win. So you can have an ascending spiral, usually married invertly to a descending spiral. Once you start losing, it gets harder and harder for you to win. So the vision of the United States originally, as I understand it, was that we tried to have all of mankind under the same rule of law, and that so therefore, and that's one of the amendments, right? Therefore, the system wouldn't be used by some people on some people. Now that's an ideal. We hold that, right? The typical example of where that's not the case is an oligarchy. The in crowd has all the advantages, and the out crowd has none of the advantages. And usually, the in crowd's advantages are directly tied to, in one way or the other, the out crowd's disadvantages. So once you have that, you have the group of people. Like, it doesn't have to be a conspiracy. It just has to be voting in your own interest once a system has been destabilized. And I think that's why, some of these old forefathers said that if America falls, it falls from inside, not from outside. And this is probably the root of it. I think there's plenty of history that once things get beyond a certain point, tranquility and peace are no longer easily attained, right? Uh, I mean, I think that the class war becomes more inevitable. There's this old idea that we've spoken about before. In French, they call it noblesse oblige or noblesse oblige, which means that nobility has certain obligations. If you have certain advantages, you're supposed to bear those advantages on behalf of everyone, not just on behalf of yourself. When we were clans, that was more obvious because, of course, you want your cousins to survive, and of course, you want your nieces and nephews to be successful, and of course, well, things are just an extension of that when it's a large clan structure. But as soon as we get beyond a certain size, it becomes we get these, as we've talked about, we start othering people because their advantages seem to be contrary to our advantages. For example, there's a classic polarity between the landlord and the tenant. Whenever you have a situation where what tends to be good for the landlord tends to be bad for the tenant, and what tends to be good for the tenant tends to be bad for the landlord, you have a sort of a balance of power that needs to be dealt with. One school of thought says you rent control. The other school of thought says, no, it's just a complete free market, and if some people live in dumpsters and other people live in palaces, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. But then we have, and it's interesting because as for those folks that have been listening to us along the way here, our conversations have not been predetermined. And so things sort of arise from the things that are going on around us. And we've kind of, and also the people that have wanted to talk to us, the things that were important to them. And a lot of those have sort of directed us in the direction of ethics. So I've been reading a bunch of ethics lately and, prepping for some folks that we're going to talk with. And also, looking at the different ethical models and juxtaposing it with my ethics and the way that I feel my ethics. And of course, you and I have had many discussions around these types of topics. And I find that I'm a Confucian, basically, because I have this idea of a true aristocracy, which in the Confucian Analects, one would always hear the superior man should da 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 da, implying that there are different ethics, that what's ethical for one person in one station might be different than the ethics from another person based directly on their influence. So the term in Chinese is Chun Tzu, the gentleman. And in the Old West, we had this idea of what a gentleman was. And that's where this root of this idea of aristos in Greek means the best, aristocracy, right? Who do we want to listen to? The one who will solve our problems with the least pain involved and the least cost to us, that will keep us on the right path. Well, who are those going to be? Well, they better be the best. That's the old thinking. So, so the Chun Tzu has certain responsibilities that make up the the social definition of Chun Tzu, that ideal that everyone should try to attain in the ways that they can. And this might be worth actually searching I to read because I did look at this. Let me just try to do it in live here. Chun Tzu.
There are multiple matches for Chun Tzu, including South
Okay,
Korean
we don't want to do that. Chun Tzu literally means son of a ruler, kind of like the Spanish hidalgo, son of somebody. But the Confucian tradition reserves the term for one who possesses a truly human heart, who cherishes the arts of learning and teaching, and who is as concerned to teach by moral example as by intellectual knack. And that pretty much I've read some other ones that talked about step broke it into 8 components or things where it's, the Chun Tzu wants to be listening and harmonizing with the Tao at large. The Chun Tzu wants to be setting an example for those that he can assist. And so there is a scale where one becomes more and more Chun Tzu, not just I go through the day and I didn't screw anybody over. There's a different is a different worldview that says that somehow the Chun Tzu brings the fulfillment of humanity through his example and through his life, through his modeling of harmonious relations. Because Confucianism is very much about harmonious relations within society. And so honestly, having been marinated in all these different traditions over the years, raised in Christianity, studied a lot of Buddhism, a lot of Taoism, uh, trying to understand the psychological underpinnings of all these things. I come out of Confucian, whose ethical principle is basically do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But I think it has more than that. And that's that idea we've spoken about coming out of Kabbalah, this idea that you either have a will to receive or a will to bestow. And the Chunsa is one through his harmonious relationship with the reality and society and everything has the necessary preconditions to be able to bestow slack for people that need it, to bestow teaching to those that need it, to bestow caring, manifesting a human heart. Uh, Sometimes in Confucianism, they refer to the two virtues of humanity and justice, and so those are virtues that the Chun Tzu doesn't just speak about; he lives out of those values. He is a living one of those values. So so that's where I kind of end up in the ethical conversation, and
Well,
uh,
since you're bringing up ethics and kind of how we interrelate, one of the things that really struck me running into this on X was how do you talk to somebody that's so reductionist? And it's really disheartening. Like you come across this way of looking at the world, and it's like, what do I even do with this? Like,
right.
how do you have a conversation?
I think that my first insight around that is you don't have a debate. Uh, Although it might be very entertaining, certain types of dialogue, and this is another thread that's sort of shown up that's going to unfold over our next conversations. You know, we still have an episode yet which will be behind us when this airs, uh, with a PhD philosopher from St. John's, which is all about dialectic coming in the tradition of Socrates. And the types of conversations that Socrates have were different. He wants to get us to truth by remembering truth. This is very interesting, angle on things. But and then, we're also lined up to have some conversations about uh, realizations that David Bohm had in his approach to dialogue. So I think that we need a deeper meeting of the minds than just debate or a confrontation between argumentative systems. I think we do need to take systems and we do need to contrast them and compare them, but we need to do it in a way that understands that each of these systems was, as I mentioned before, when we were talking about the history of Western thought, which will be behind us when this airs, that all these things are built around certain insights. And whether they're insights about consciousness or insights about the world or insights about history, they tend to be built around certain insights. And the better models we have incorporate more and more insights holistically. So rather than it being we take this system whole or this system whole, we say, and this is kind of that Hegelian idea of synthesis and antithesis, but I think that's too polar. I think that that's one of some of the later phenomenologists maybe had that insight also, that the language kind of forces us into a polarity that might be flattening out the the coastline of Norway, as we've said before, and maybe we need that detail. Maybe we need that insight. Uh, so the idea is that we maybe have these two different cognitive models can meet in ways where their comparisons and their contrasts actually build maybe not a new a synthesis. Well, I guess it is a synthesis, but it might not be a polar synthesis. It might be a radial synthesis of many insights from many directions, rooted in experience, like the Chun Tzu.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess my impression of some of these people posting is they're dragging knuckles on the ground and not capable of having a conversation to gather and synthesize insights.
No, they're throwing matches in haystacks, is what they're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah,
Which is probably it's probably the slag that comes off the top of the cauldron when you're melting
uh-huh.
things together. Because I do feel like the dialogue approach, even though I'm not on X, it's just because it just didn't take for me. Um, and also I probably expressed something and probably had some system thing tell me, "Oh," and wag its finger at me, at which point I was like, "Pfft, I'm shoving off." If my feeling about social media, just as an aside, is that if I can say it in a bar and not get beat up or thrown out, I should be able to say it online without getting arrested or anything else. Uh, but uh, but so I do think that something's served here. I do think that we're learning collectively in ways that we couldn't have before. I do think that these new cognitive connections, linkages that happen. Because I know before the interweb, there are a lot of people that I knew back in my prior life that I had no exchange with. And then the possibility to do that through social media has actually given me feedback because now I know how a lot of these stories that I knew the beginning of, now I know how it's working out. Which, I mean, no judgment or no social judgment, personal judgment, but just like you do when you data collect, right? Certain theories are affirmed and certain theories are overturned. And so I find that there's a learning curve there. And then when you throw a billion people at it, and then another thing that we have to get into that we have only touched on, well, we've touched on it a bit, and that is the mystery of language and the connectedness. We talked about the beginning of the Gospel of John in archeologos in the Greek, and the beginning was the word. But uh, there is something that, the later phenomenologist, Gadamer refers to as linguisticality, that human experience has a certain linguisticality. There's stuff about language that roots into all of this. Uh, but so the use of this and that dovetails right into low resolution models, which is kind of what you're experiencing with the match throwers,
Yeah.
the haystack burners. And it's like, yeah, but see, thoughtful people will realize that those low resolution models don't resolve because they're too low resolution. And so maybe the function of that is like, the slag floats up on a cauldron of metal when you're melting it. And you can just take a scraper and you can just scrape that all off and pour off the pure metal. So there
Yeah,
may
in
be
some ways, I mean, it's clear that for example, policy proposals coming from that level of consciousness don't resolve because you say
right.
only people of European descent belong in the United States, and immediately you're at, well, what does that mean, and as of when, and what about the people that are mixed one thing or another in Western
That's
Europe.
never been America.
There's no resolution there.
No.
But 1930s Germany proved that it is possible to resolve ideology based on this kind of match throwing into a political system. Whether that
Right,
ultimately resolves as a healthy society is another thing, but it can certainly
right,
do
right.
some damage along the way. So it's just kind of like
Yep. Well, what I was just reading in Gadamer about hermeneutics, he was talking exactly about that process that we talked about with Rich. When a politician uses a poll, they're not polling what to do, they're polling what pulls the trigger,
yeah,
what yanks the chain. And then they speak based on that. And he talks about that because that's one of the ways that we get fooled is things get taken out of proportion because we haven't had a neutral, objective explication of the situation to be able to judge from. So, and I think that that comes down to, I mean, everybody knows that America was found in, I mean, they call it the Great Mixing Pot, right? So that's kind of been our thing, and I think that people have interpreted America's success in part, maybe in larger part than is true, to this ability to mix and integrate, which is an important part. I mean, it's nice to have the diversity, but you need integrated diversity. You need to have the method that connects those people to the same hub so that their diversity of perspective comes in a way that's integratable as opposed to just fragmentation. Because, there are oppositional approaches to things that maybe don't inform, right? So, so my feeling is that I mean, I'm all for diversity, but I understand also that every benefit you have to work for. It isn't just thrown on your plate. So to fulfill the diversity promise is more sophisticated, I think, than a lot of people realize. No low resolution model is going to get us there.
yeah.
But as far as the H1B1, is it, or
H1B.
H1B? Uh, what I immediately saw, and this is one of these things about what standard do people hold themselves to? Uh, we enact certain laws or certain protocols to deal with certain issues, but every one of these is like a computer program that has to be tested for its hackability, right? Because as soon as, just like putting something up online, that if there's any oomph behind it, someone's going to be attacking it to try to hack it to get advantage out of it, which is definitely not Chun Tzu behavior. Okay, let's put that out there. And this is why I've said before: if people were realized, or as Chris Lang would say, if we were doing it right, then I think almost any system would work because it would just be a formalization, a protocolization of really trying to get the best end.
And as we've talked about, it would be virtue running the show, not the system. Or
Exactly.
or in other words, it would be principle running the show, not ideology.
Exactly.
Yep.
Or something worse than ideology, which is just greed and criminal uh eyes rolled back in the head, will to receive, shark brain, you know, which is I think Timothy Leary referred to that as one of the stages. And he had this idea that was a developmental agenda that looked at where a baby comes in, and this is kind of mirrors what Wilhelm Reich talks about. We go through certain developmental stages. At a certain point, a baby is ocular. At a certain point, a baby is oral. At a certain point, they go through an anal stage. This is usually when a baby discovers their own poop, right? Uh, I won't tell the story that comes to mind when I think of that. It's a professional father story. Uh, but the idea is that we come out finally having integrated all these different capacities, uh, so that we're whole and complete and balanced, and that things impact along the way, and we come out retarded, not as an insult, but meaning that some developmental stage has been slowed down. That's what retarded means. Tardy, right? Lateness. So when that happens, we don't behave up to snuff. And so, there's kind of two models. One that says that okay, you get to functioning adult, and then boom, you're there, and then go on along your way. The other one says there's no end to this process. You're always becoming more whole, more complete, more expanded, more capacity filled, more of the inside manifested out through that will to bestow from the inside. So that's a more fruitful model. And of course, like Plato's Republic, the philosopher kings are the gold, the guardians are the silver, the craftsmen are the copper. The way that that gets interpreted, which when we talked about this last time, I didn't get a chance to explore the analogy that's at work there. On the surface of things, we're saying there's three different classes of people. But the way that people have come over the years to understand the republic, one of the ways is that the state, the republic that he's talking about, is the human soul. And so that within ourselves, we have golden impulses, we have silver impulses, we have copper impulses. And I said before, the currency of the gold of the philosopher king is truth and beauty and justice. Of the silver is glory and honor, and of the craftsman, and we discussed it should be quality, but often ends up just as profit. Uh, just like one can mistake dishonorable acts for honorable acts in the same way. So what this means is that when we translate that out of the analogy, it means that a human has all these impulses, and that here we come to that famous line from Harry Potter. It's the choices that one makes, Harry, that makes us who we are, not our abilities. And that's literally what that model says, is that the Chun Tzu, the highest type of person, encourages the right elements of their character so that it moves them to a higher and a higher place of clarity, of love of truth and beauty and the good, to use the Platonic model, uh, or love of God is to use the religious model. So, yeah, I mean, can we solve? This is a question that we're going to be asking over the episodes here, and with hopefully with some experts to help illuminate us. Uh, how do we solve that problem of operating out of our highest selves and creating a system that guides and nurtures people into operating out of their highest selves without becoming the antithesis of that? And I'm not sure that we can do it. I mean, I've said before that I'm kind of a philosophical anarchist. I don't think that there's an archy way to do that. That is a hierarchy where someone holds authority over another person.
Yeah.
I think what you always end up with a problem there. So what do we
Well,
need? We need the enlightenment of the human race.
yeah. I'm just cautious not to flatten out the idea of hierarchy too much, because I think there's natural hierarchy, and and that's not a bad thing. So if you're hanging
I don't
around
think
with
it can be
somebody,
escaped. I don't think you can escape
right?
some type of hierarchy until you reach the enlightenment of the human race.
I'm not sure that that also doesn't include some hierarchy, and
Well, no, it
and
may
nor
well.
nor that it's a bad thing. Yeah.
It's just not a hierarchy of force.
Right. Right. That's the distinction I'm making.
Yeah. Which you could call a competency hierarchy
Yeah.
if you, uh, uh, and I think that, yeah, I mean, it's all the devil is in the details. Uh, or like one that I just read out of James Joyce today. God made the food, but the devil the cooks. So yeah, we start out good, and then the devil gets in the details. And then how do we cook it? How are we cooking it?
Yeah. Well, that brings up a few interesting things. This is a total left turn, but I'm going to go with it because it's what's coming to mind.
Uh-huh.
When we're talking about kind of feeding the highest our highest nature, and that who we are is the choices that we make, not our potential. Something that I've been thinking about lately is how I experience my own potential differently than I used to. So when I was in my 20s, if somebody like if you would say, if you want to become enlightened, do this, I would think I want to become enlightened and I'm going to try to do that. Like it doesn't mean I necessarily was able to commit to whatever that is, but I would often have that thought of like um, imagining the I guess maybe imagining extreme change being possible or extreme growth being possible. And I'm going to be
Transformation.
what's that?
Transformation.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't transformation at a particular scale. I still absolutely relate to the idea of transformation, but I think of it much more incrementally now. And also, I don't associate less meaning with that. I'm not
Oh
grieving
no.
that difference. But I definitely experience potential much more incrementally. Like, I no longer think it's it's possible, let alone likely, that I'm going to attain enlightenment in this lifetime, or that I can become a master in that kind of realm. I just don't have enough time now to to get through that, and
Well,
that's
there's the
cool.
path of karma yoga. I
Well,
consider myself to some degree a karma yogi.
yeah, I guess I imagine our listeners, some of them might also experience this changing relationship to potential, and so that's very much a first quadrant question, meaning an internal individual.
Well,
I don't know how it's related to
incremental transformation is growth.
yeah,
Couldn't be different between an acorn and an oak tree. Couldn't be more different, but it didn't happen overnight, for sure. And that's where that idea of sort of having an instinct is what we're really talking about is like trying to put your finger up and measure the soul wind. When I am who the universe really intends me to be, what'll that look like? And how do I steer towards that? Because then I can presume that the universe will be on my side in getting me there. Simple as that. Uh, but that's that internal compass thing, the meter. That's the and that changes, as you were saying, with growth and with understanding, and that doesn't stop. I mean, one of the good things about getting old is that the fingers of your understanding grow larger, so you can palm bigger and bigger basketballs. Unless you've damaged yourself, which happens over lifetimes too. But the idea is that if there has been this incremental growth, you're getting bigger and bigger samples. I think about things that were a chapter that was a decade long, and now I think of a decade like, pfft, right? But when I was 18, a decade was like a decade. Are you kidding?
yeah,
Well, that's a great example of it. Or
right,
it's like when I flew to Turkey, and I could see the distance from Scotland to Turkey, and I had that experience to compare from Kansas to New York or whatever. All of a sudden, I grasped the globe in a different way. That's like a spatial version of it. Saw the Dardanelles, saw the Mediterranean. Oh, I get it now. So that does happen with time and with age. And I think that there may be a false dichotomy of not having enough time because I'm not sure that every minute is equal on those scales. I do think that while incremental change is the rule, there are faster changes that we've referred to as chapter changes, where on one side of the line and on the other side of the line are very different. Having a child born, great example,
Yeah.
and so those big changes are built up slowly through smaller changes preparatorily that lead up to it, and then the bigger change manifests. And I guess what as far as the enlightenment part, the Buddha said, I believe, well, I'll check this for the show notes, that enlightenment is inches from here. It's inches from here, and which means that it really is a shift in not just a shift in the cognitive model, but a shift in the relationship to the process that makes that cognitive model and uses it as a way to relate to the world. And altering that from the knowing, from the knower seat. And, that's where the perspective, the seat determines the view. Uh, and what you're describing is that as we go through life in these incremental transformations, the seat that our consciousness resides in has changed. It's taken on all these things. It sees more when it looks out. And that's why the conversations that we've been having about trying to unfold the dynamics of the cognitive process, the influence of language, uh, looking at different theories of mind and the experience of mind, trying to to grok the the kaleidoscopic show of the 10,000 things. Um, because it alters our view with that very process somehow. And I don't want to say it as if it's a purely internal thing because I think that the whole rest of the universe participates in that process. The field is doing something to you at the same time you are undergoing it and thinking that we're authoring it to some degree. Uh, so that's why it comes down to, I think, at all things in their time, but that doesn't mean that that you'll see it coming necessarily. Uh,
Yeah.
and there's this, and it's this process of stirring the pot, of trying to understand ourselves more deeply. That is the variable of how much a minute or a day or a year is worth. It's like how much pot stirring went on in that, and yeah, I think you're right that when you're in the world, it's more difficult maybe than when you're more in a retreated situation. That's why I live in more of a retreated situation. Um, but it can happen there. I mean, that's the tradition. This idea of karma yoga means that whatever you're doing is is the path. Everything around you is the guru, and and you're there because of everything that got you there. That's not different than the spiritual path.
Yeah.
It's the
Well,
starting place of the spiritual path.
definitely choosing things based on the intuition that they're meaningful has become much more in focus. And so that has to do with, I think, what you were just referring to, in terms of karma yoga, that whatever you're doing is the path. Um, and being able to make better and better choices about that kind of is putting the finger up in the wind. Um, but and maybe enlightenment isn't the best example, although it comes up for me, so it's a legitimate one. But if I wanted to be a kung fu master, I probably have limited time to do that, or just limited potential to do that at this point.
Mhm.
And that's real. Like, yeah, maybe if I apply myself, right? But um, but certainly the breadth of those opportunities that I felt when I was 20 is much more limited now, right? Maybe when I was 20, I might have thought, here are 10 things that I want to work on, that I might be able to master. And, you know, like, I just don't think that's very realistic anymore. And that's okay. But it does give choices a different flavor. It gives life, like, there's like a maybe an appreciation for more incremental change. Maybe
Uh-huh.
there's also an awareness now that incremental change shouldn't be undervalued, because it's not always evident in the moment, the that a seemingly incremental change isn't a radical transformation.
Right.
Um,
Or laying the groundwork for it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
yeah, that's just been kind of an interesting thing floating around lately, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you've experienced that too.
Well, and you have there's a saying in Chinese that while you're looking at the horizon, you're stepping over the branch at your feet. You probably referred to that before. And because there is our general intention, our karma, our destiny, if you will, but there's also the things that just happen every day that we sort of have to work our way through. And the degree to which we can choose those or not has been a long debate all around free will. Uh, and because our our future is definitely tied up in our present. And so yeah, that unfolding process out of an instinct of who you know yourself to be on the higher level, I think I think that's all you've got. But I think that the important thing is to really have that. Because a lot of people don't have that. To have that, you have to realize that you are the one who's having the instinct of who you really are, not your teachers, not your significant others, not like, how could they? That's your turf. So that doesn't mean that they won't try. That doesn't mean that your country won't try and your everything around will try,
Mm.
particularly that karma that nailed your foot down in one particular place. So I think that for a lot of people that might be a great target would be to actually self-determine in the important ways. I don't just mean picking the color house you wear or what your hairstyle is. I mean, in the big decisions, becoming who you are. This is like Alan Watts's book on the taboo against knowing who you really are. Well, so you do have to go through a process to do that. And I maybe typically presuppose that because that was a chapter back for me. Not that there isn't always a process there, but uh, once you've gotten to the point where enough people are telling you you're crazy, but you know you're doing the right thing, you sort of gain a certain confidence. That I know it sounds crazy, but
It sounds risky.
it sounds risky, yeah. And but honestly, what is riskier than not being who you are? So better to pay that one price up front but, it's against the taboo of knowing who you really are, which means that it can't just be a superficial impression. It means that it's the process of that deep belly, deep heart instinct understanding that comes from inside, that's remembered maybe, like Plato says, that's not downloaded from outside. Because we all get a lot of that. "Oh, you're so this. Oh, you're so that." And we kinda can puff ourselves up, then we start to take on this idea, I think it's Heidegger, uh, where he says we refer to myself, but he uses the term das Man in German, which gets translated as they self. Says that most of us are not myself, we're they self. We are the people that they want us to be instead of actually be owning our own selves and having manifested our own selves. And that's that will to bestow, because you can only bestow what's you, right? It can only come from inside of you if it's you. So you're only going to be in a good position to be rooted in the will to bestow coming through who you really are. And I know that sounds kind of tricky, but this is the only game in town. To not pursue this game is just to pursue it poorly. So might as well be who you are. Might as well figure out who you really are and try to win yourself as much freedom to do that as you can. I mean, that's what I can say because, particularly for people that are younger than me, that process is still at work. Remember, this is the process of killing the dragon, of the lion killing the dragon in the desert. Upon each scale is written, "Thou shalt." Well, that definition of "thou shalt" is tangled up with who thou shalt be. Thou shalt be this because parents, because school, because peer expectations, because job expectations, because a fancy that once, you know, uh, so, one of my kids, when he was little, he went through a chapter when he was the Red Ranger from the Power Rangers. He went through another chapter. His mom went to pick him up at kindergarten, and all the kids say goodbye to him. They say, "Goodbye, Plucky." He told all these kids his name was Plucky Duck, right? So, we yes, we grow up, but some of us are still, pursuing our own versions of Plucky Duck, but we're not Plucky Duck or the Red Ranger, or, you fill it in. Maybe we're informed by those things. Maybe that we hold certain things as values, but who we really are is deeper than that. We kind of gotta go through that process of letting who we are bubble out, and the way we know is by banging up against things in the outer world that sort of reveal us through that, right?
It's interesting because I think there is this experience of potential changing that I brought up, but the connection that you're making, I think, is really I really appreciate, which is that um, yeah, we might be experiencing potential differently, but weed out the, or I'm hearing an admonishment maybe to weed out the kind of artifice, the internal expectations, the external expectations, all of the superficial ways we think about identity, and you know allow for transformation to happen from that internal authentic place, and it is enough. It is what it is. Um, and I wasn't really experiencing a lack of enough, but there was a little, maybe a sense of mourning around this idea of potential that you know um, maybe is yeah, it's just recontextualized kind of by
Uh-huh,
what you're saying.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that part of aging is, if you're wise, you you come to have realizations where, I don't know how to do this with giving you all the you and I have talked about Levinas and this idea. Levinas is a philosopher in the tradition of Heidegger and Husserl, phenomenologist, uh, who talks about his great work is uh, uh, about totality. It's totality and
Infinity.
method, infinity, totality and infinity, exactly. And so this idea of totality or of totalizing things, to do probably a bad job of summarizing it, is sort of this idea that we can pull everything in the outer world into us, where Levinas would say it becomes the same. And we might say that we bring it in and we We put it into our cognitive model. We give it a spot. I might even say we kind of render it safe. By integrating it into our cognitive picture of things. And uh, there is this fantasy that everything outside of us can somehow be brought in and accounted for and thereby manipulated and made safe and certain. And it's very similar to when you're young, you have this idea that you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and your life is going to look like this and it's going to look like that if you carry that kind of thing. And then at some point, you realize that what's going to happen is what happens. And you're never going to be able to capture everything and control it all and sort of make it render it safe and certain. Th- It's always going to wiggle out somehow. You're never going to calculate pi to that final decimal place. You're going to get more and more accurate, but it's always going to slip out. And something about that tendency to slip out is this idea of, let God take control because I'm not in a position to be able to control and render safe and totalize everything into myself. So I have to kind of let some of that go. And I think that when we master things, if we can really do that, it might kind of lead us down the path that we can master all of the things of life and gain that certainty somehow. This that we can quench that Lebensangst, that fear of living from Reich. That that's what I mean by rendering it all safe. We can use mind, we can use our cognitive model to account for everything, so we'll never get surprised. We can all and then we'll just unfold stuff, you know, it seems not completely unreasonable. But then you find out that no, this life is a really slippery eel. Stuff doesn't come out the way we expect. People don't behave the way we expect. The future doesn't look the way we expect. So something we have to integrate something into ourselves to negotiate that rather than go on an effort to try to just grow bigger tentacles and suck more in somehow. If that makes sense. And And everything changes, I think, once you hit that point. And maybe I think age makes that easier. This probably wouldn't be an easy or maybe even a healthy thing to realize at too young an age.
Mm. Yeah, I'm wondering how much of a discrete event that realization is, because what you're saying isn't news to me at all. But I think my relationship to that continues to deepen, and I know that there's room there, right? Where
Mhm.
there's probably a mix at this point of the desire to totalize and the willingness to accept the infinite. It,
Right.
yeah.
Meister Eckhart said, famous Christian mystic, he said, I find that to the degree that I remove myself from my life, to that degree God enters in.
Hmm.
And I of course psychologize what he's saying, being a modern, and that's what I say. That's what I see in that is that when I stop trying to pull everything into me, make it the same as Levinas might say, uh, then I create a space for other, and that whether it's other seen through the face of nature changing in front of us or the behavior of people, somehow our relationship with everything is changed by that. And I'm thinking that maybe that's where David Bentley Hart is gonna come out on this "All Things Are Full of Gods," which is, one of the more
Yeah, we'll
recent
see.
publications here. We'll see if that comes out of that.
Good. Well, interesting. Thanks, Brian.
For sure. Talk to you next time,
Yeah.
folks. And stay tuned, we got so much cool stuff coming up.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah.